Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections and your host of the Networking RX podcast. Today I want to talk about happiness. Somebody referred me to a TEDx talk. It was done back in 2015, I believe. I don't know the exact date on it. But it was TEDx Beacon Street, which I believe is near Harvard University. But the person giving the talk was a gentleman by the name of Robert Waldinger. And what Robert is, he's the fourth generation leader of a 75-year study. And when I say fourth generation leader, somebody started the study, someone took the study over after them, and then somebody else, and then Robert took it over. Robert is a researcher, I assume at Harvard, but he presented some findings that they had over this 75-year study, and it's very rare, as he talks about, and I'll put the link to the video in the show notes. It's very rare to have a study go on this long. We as humans have short attention spans. It's hard to keep people in a study. If you're trying to study somebody over a 75-year period, it's a difficult thing to do. People lose funding, people lose interest, whatever else it might be. But this went on for 75 years. It started in 1938, and what they did was they started with two groups. They had two groups of people. They had a group of people who were sophomores in college, so 18, 19 years old, young teenagers, or old teenagers, I say, but young adults. Sophomores in college, and so in 1938. So when they were finishing, it was during World War II, and many of them went off to the war. And that was their first group of people. And the other group of people that they did this study on were boys from some of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston. And they picked the boys that they picked because they were troubled. As he talks about in the video, they lived in tenements that might not have hot water, might not have running water at all. That's something that this day and age I think we take for granted with 99.9% of the U.S. population. But there was a time in this country where sanitation and running water was a luxury. It's not so much a given. But he starts out this TED talk talking about research they'd done with millennials, and 80% of millennials wanted to be rich, and 50% of them wanted to be famous. And he talks about we have this notion, certainly in this country, maybe worldwide, that to be successful you've got to drive. So they did this study and started with 724 men. There weren't women involved in the study early on. Shame on us, but it is what it is. Ultimately, they involved some of the wives of these 724 men. And in 2016, when he was doing this TED Talk, he said we still have 60 participants still alive that are part of the study. They were in their 90s at that point in time, but they were still out there participating in the study, and the study has continued on to include upwards of 2,000 children of these original 724 people. And they looked at all sorts of stuff. They had all sorts of questions. They did a battery of looking at their health. They did CAT scans, looked at people's brains, blood work, the whole nine yards. And obviously that has changed over time because we as a society, as a medical community, know so much more about things. But they had asked questions about their life, about their home life, about their health. They went into these people's homes right from the very, very beginning and interviewed them, got a lay of the land, determined what their conditions were like. again, very interesting conversation, inspiring conversation. You need to watch the TED Talk. I will put it in the show notes, I promise. I've already put it in my notes to put it in the notes, so I'm 99.9% sure it's going to happen. Um, but what they found as being the number one thing to drive happiness is relationships, our relationships. And the relationships don't have to be, committed long-term relationships necessarily, like a marriage. Um, but it can just, be. It's not just our family, but it's our friends. It's our relationships with people in the community. Uh, all these things kind of account for our relationships. He notes in there, just about loneliness, and basically, you can be lonely in a crowd. You can be lonely in a marriage. So, just being married or, hanging out with large groups of people all the time doesn't necessarily mean that you've got good relationships. It's just these connections, and really how he ends up defining it is just talking about being able to rely on other people. Who are the people in your life that you can rely on? But they came away with three lessons from this study, and this study continues on to this day. I don't know that Robert Waldinger will be the last, hopefully not the last. Harvard's got lots of money, lots of resources. It seems to me they can find somebody to continue on this study and continue it on for another 75 years. Who knows what we'll find from this? But they've come away so far with three lessons. And the three lessons are social connections are good for us, and loneliness kills. And I've done a podcast episode on this earlier where I talked about how loneliness is toxic. It's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And we need to commit to having people in our lives. We need to commit to reaching out to people who might be lonely. And we all might know somebody, but we need to be inclusive. And I don't, this is not certainly racially and across sexes and the gender spectrum or whatever. But we need to reach out and make sure everybody feels a part of society, because those bonds are really, really important to us. But what they also found is that it's not the number of friends or whether or not we're in a committed relationship, as I've indicated, but it's the quality of those close relationships. High conflict relationships are toxic. They are, and there have been other studies that have shown there are predictors. I did an episode earlier. I forget the number, but I call it the 4 Horsemen of a doomed relationship or something like that. And so there are studies out there that have been done on this, and they can predict whether a marriage will last or not just based on the interaction between the spouses. And you go back and you can listen to that. But what they found is in the second lesson is that warm relationships are protective for us. People knowing that we can count on people helps our health. And what they did was, once you have 75 years of information and all these studies, and they would call people in, and every year they would, do these studies, and they would do a battery of medical examinations on them. And what they found was the best predictor for somebody living into the 80s had nothing really to do with their cholesterol level, but their level of satisfaction with respect to their relationships. Were they satisfied with the people that they had in their lives? Was a better predictor, when people were in their 50s, was a better predictor of whether they would live into their 80s. Now, it's not going to guarantee you're going to live into your 80s, obviously. Things happen, accidents happen, cancer happens, things happen. Knock wood for everybody. But, if you're in your 50s or even 40s or 30s, if you have a high degree of satisfaction with respect to the relationships in your life, that's a pretty good predictor that you're going to have a happy, healthy existence. And being happy and healthy are certainly tied to one another. So first 2 lessons, social connections are good for us, loneliness kills. And the second thing is not the number of friends. Don't care that you got 18,000 connections on LinkedIn or 3,000 friends on Facebook. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter about the likes. Doesn't matter about the loves, the shares, or any of that stuff. That's all superficial stuff. But are these committed relationships with people that you can rely upon? People you can turn to and say, I need a favor. You got 5 minutes. I need to talk to you. Those are great predictors of our happiness, of our long-term health. And the last thing that they've learned, the third lesson, is that good relationships not just protect our bodies, not just protect our health, but also protect our brains. People who have strong relationships have less memory issues than people who are lonely, people who are in toxic relationships. And I think it's certainly an important thing to do if you're really committed to having that long-term happy, healthy life. I share this with people all the time. My number one goal in life is to live to 100. And I just feel that drives so much more. I obviously need to have money to do that, so working hard and saving. But I also realize that relationships matter. I guess in addition to having money, I realize that I need to kind of watch my health and eat right, or not super poor. Eat reasonably well, exercise, do those things. But having relationships is a key thing. So I'm going to leave it at this today. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more. In lieu of that, please watch the TEDx talk. Please watch the TEDx talk. And then just reach out to people, share the link, tell people you care about them. My kids probably hate me right now, but I sent them the link before I started recording this and just basically said, and my wife as well, she was included on it. Hey, I love you guys. You can always count on me. And I just think that's an important thing we need to do. I'm thankful, and they're in my life. I have lots of other people in my life. Obviously, many people listening to this are in my life. My AmSpirit community, my networking hub community, charitable roundtable community. I've got a lot of committed people that I have relationships with. Some people I've never met in person that I feel strongly about, and I'm committed to continuing to grow that, and I hope that you guys are as well. Make it a great day.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.